So hello, we have two last talks in front of us, and it's my pleasure to introduce Diana Larsen here. She is a co-author of the first book I read about the Agile, and it was Agile Retrospectives. And I still remember that day when I bring that book and I start reading it and saying like, oh, there's so many things to learn. And I was like, the scrum master of a new team and learning all that stuff. So that's her. And then we met at many conferences. I've been at plenty of her talks. She's a very inspirational lady. So I hope you enjoy it. All yours.
Thank you. All right, here we are getting going. In addition to, I'm Diana Larsen, as Susie just said, and in addition to Agile Retrospectives, I would also like to mention my some other greatest hits, Liftoff and 5 Rules for Accelerated Learning, and today we'll be talking a little bit about Agile Fluency model as well. I'm so happy to be here with you today. I really hope you've enjoyed the conference so far and that all of us as speakers are supporting the learning that you are hungry for and that you are seeking. Today, I'm going to talk about a specific aspect of agility: limits, teams, investments, and trade-offs. And because of the nature of this format, I'll pause briefly at the end of each section for you to do some reflection. At the end of the slides, we'll dive deeper into questions as time allows. So please have writing materials handy so you can take notes about the things you'd like to discuss further, but also to remind yourself later about thoughts that relating to your own work that have occurred to you along the way. And when we have the pauses or all through, please add your questions to the chat. We'll answer as many as possible at the end of the slides. So also, if you'd like to learn more or comment on this session later on, use this contact information to get in touch in whatever way works best for you. I was browsing Twitter a little while ago and I saw that a lot of folks were tweeting about the conference, but also just to get in touch and ask questions. So I was thinking about the title of this talk and went and looked for some definitions about that. And so how is how we approach things, the manner we do it. Limits are the boundaries, restrictions, constraints, expectations, whether clear or unclear, create limits. Empowering is permitting to make possible, and then your context, and agility, which is quick, graceful, ease, and that has to do with the Agile software development manifesto. When I think about agility, I think about what Peter Drucker named knowledge work, which I think in the current age has morphed into more learning work. This talk is about the ways that learning work creates new knowledge, information, and products. Just as with any creative arts, it is enabled by limitations. My mom spent many years as an artist, both teaching artistic processes and creating her own works, even well into her 90s. She's still going strong. Her house is a gallery of her artwork, and so is mine. Growing up, I heard variations on the theme of these quotes about the importance of limitations all my life. And I've proved the truth of this in my own work. For the organization and team agility I'll cover here, we'll use the Agile Fluency model as an applicable scaffolding. If you're unfamiliar with this model, I invite you to visit a 10-minute video in our booth or on the agilefluency.org homepage. In short, the idea is that before choosing to adopt an Agile approach or becoming aware of the need for greater agility in pre-Agile, An organization has its workers, specifically software development professionals, arranged in groups of individual contributors who are assigned tasks individually, generally according to their area of specialization, and directly coordinated by a manager according to a predetermined plan. It's fine for some kinds of routine, replicable work. But some organizations realize this isn't getting them the outcomes or productivity they need if their work isn't routine or replicable. So leaders decide to shift to a more agile way of working. And often the first shift they choose to target is team fluency in the focusing zone. For example, a number of years ago, I worked with a large public utility company that was undergoing a shift to smart metering, um, automating the work that's performed by individual meter readers, painstakingly going from house to house by pulling that data into the system. This effort had a lot of moving parts, as you can imagine. It was a multi-year project impacting many departments, many functions of the utility, and IT's role in developing the critical software was far behind schedule. With 18 months to go live with the meters, the software was months and months delayed. The CIO and new director of application development both had backgrounds with Lean from a previous company, and they decided to try Agile. That's when I got a call to join the project. Instead of having the work spread across all the IT department, we assigned 5 teams made up of folks who had the right skills and background to focus exclusively on the smart metering project. We instituted basic Scrum, simple cross-functional teams, basic Agile communication and collaboration techniques between among in the team, within the team, and with their product owner and customers, just for those 5 teams. And not only did those teams make up the delay, they finished their work first. They had their deliverables ready before anybody else in the smart metering project. It was so successful, senior leaders decided to shift the entire IT department into 17 teams, a new structure that enabled an agile approach to work on all their projects and products. Nothing fancy, just basic focusing fluency, because the team's ability to focus on the organization's highest priorities and communicate with stakeholders had proved so valuable to them. We talked with leaders about the benefits of the Agile fundamentals in the focusing zone. We showed how they could reduce the cost of delay, focus on most valuable first, and so on. The teams reduced waste due to building the wrong thing. We were able to redirect them when new information and new feedback came in. Teams improved communication within the team and with stakeholders. There was a whole team focus on the outcome. The teams learned to think and plan their work to produce the benefits everyone needed to see. Effectively making a shift to focusing teams also means limiting the investments in enabling the team's work. Scattershot training or overloading expectations doesn't work. Management by moving people around doesn't work. Specific targeted investments, keeping our eyes on the prize, that's what works. Other limits that can help teams achieve skillful proficiency in focusing include work and process limits from Kanban, clear working agreements, team assignments, even limits like sizing the work. You can probably think of others. And I'm going to pause here to give you time to capture your thoughts so far in your notes and write a few questions in the chat. And I'm going to roll my shoulders and take some deep breaths. I know it's been a long day for you here. Okay, let's move on. Limits work best when they are explicit, clear, and based on the most recent and relevant information. We want to avoid wishful thinking, magical thinking. We want to concentrate on the investment options, the real investment options, and trade-offs. Moving on to the next shift in the model, focusing teams can be very adequate for business needs, as in the smart meter example. However, there are businesses who need teams with additional capabilities to reach their goals. They also need their teams reliably to deliver low defect software frequently. That's where the fluent proficiencies in the delivering zone come in. Fluent delivering teams have the agile engineering skills needed to produce quality code and release at will. The benefits can't be overstated. Consider reducing QA time, reducing time spent on fixing defects, reducing the cost of deployment, and the value of increased morale and decreasing employee churn. All these benefits can be quantified. We regularly see 20% or more reductions in waste and similar reductions in lead time from teams approaching delivering fluency. This adds hundreds of thousands of dollars to value from each team. These benefits cannot be achieved without clarifying the investment boundaries and trade-offs. The investments are also substantial. It takes time for teams to learn the skills needed and pay down technical debt. Even though learning curves can be expensive, they may be well worth it over time. In a company where the next deadline is always the most important thing, the initial investment is deciding that the later acceleration promised by greater skill will be worth the patience and expense. That's why leaders have to make this a conscious choice. They may also need to invest in skilled Agile practitioners to mentor their teams, not just assigning any random former project manager with no Agile background, as we see too often. We find that companies often discover the value of the delivering zone after they've spent time in the focusing zone or had other experience with Agile that didn't get them the results they needed. That's okay. Better to learn from their experience and choose the improvements that they need. Specific limits that can help teams achieve skillful proficiency in delivering include working according to team coding standards instead of individual preferences, abiding by effective agreements for meetings, reducing the backlog visibility to optimize cognitive load, and other limits like those Lori Apple, a colleague in Berlin, I'm wondering if she's in the conference today, she told me about. She shared several ways that limits had supported the work of the teams at her company and improved the overall business agility in response to the pandemic new reality. For example, to stay productive in a changing environment, her company limited the number of initiatives they would work on. They pared down the workload from 25 simultaneous product efforts to just 3 that they knew were most important to accomplish first. Setting strict priorities, limits. Let's pause again so you can note limits you may have noticed or considered for your teams, and take this opportunity to write questions in the chat. Moving on. A few leaders guide businesses that require more innovation and disruption to meet their product development goals, more than is reliably produced by delivering zone teams. The optimizing zone embraces the promise of Agile. Teams that respond to changing market needs by collaborating with their customers to make market-leading decisions. Artfully interacting to build working software through customer collaboration and responding flexibly to changing needs. Where have we heard that before? The opportunities will depend on the nature of the customer and market and may include improved competitiveness, reduced communication delay and waste, and better alignment with market needs. At one company, my colleague James talked to the chief product officer who said that this zone would allow them to better meet the needs of their market, a move he believed would increase sales by 10%. It would also address their most common cause of developer dissatisfaction, which was confusion about how their work related to company goals. And he thought that would reduce employee churn by 10%. These were that chief product officer's numbers, not ours. Since this is a company with hundreds of millions in annual sales, 10% is worth several $1,000,000 a year. It was definitely worth his while to pause, to examine the options, the investments, and the trade-offs that would make this possible. And they are significant. Of course, significant benefits involve significant investments. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it already. The optimizing zone requires an investment in shifting organizational structure. You have to move business expertise and decision-making into the teams, and that requires a real effort of political will. Management structure may need to shift. Organization assumptions might be challenged. Promotional paths may alter. We find that many companies aren't even aware that this zone is possible. But when we talk to senior leaders, they are intrigued and delighted, though middle managers tend to find this zone disruptive or even threatening because of the kinds of changes it requires. I won't go into more details about this right now, but you can find more in our free downloadable ebook. Again, go to agilefluency.org and follow the download the ebook link. Specific limits that can help teams achieve skillful proficiency in optimizing zone include budgetary and funding expectations, defining specific cross-functional skills required by the product developers of this product, limiting metrics to those few that will provide the most useful to the business, and team decision authority boundaries. What are your thoughts? Would your organization rise to the challenge of limits, trade-offs, and investments to gain the benefits of optimizing teams? Or would focusing or delivering teams be a better fit for your business? I'll pause a moment more while you record your thoughts about optimizing and overall what you've heard so far. And remember, if questions have occurred to you, please put them in the chat. Going on, a surprising thing about the model, though, is that it's faster and more effective to choose the right zone for you right at the beginning. and then go all in. That might mean limiting investments to those options that build focusing zone proficiencies, rather than buying a whole pre-packaged Agile transformation. Or it might mean saying we want a delivering zone and doing all the focusing and delivering proficiencies, working on all of them right from the beginning. The good news is you can change your mind. The proficiencies are mutually supportive. So a team that's concurrently working on learning focusing and delivering skills will gain focusing fluency faster. We find the Agile Fluency model is a great way to focus your conversation with leaders only on what they need, limits, keeping their constraints in mind while exploring the benefit investment trade-off. Combined with a spirit of honest discovery, we've found this to be a very effective way forward. By the way, if you'd like a copy of this larger graphic for reproducing, contact us and we'll send you a PDF with it. So typical trade-offs. So far, we've been discussing benefits, investments, and a few limits, but what about the trade-offs? What are some of the costs of achieving fluency? Keep in mind, fluency is unconscious competence. It's your routine way of working. It's not what you stretch into on a good day with no distractions and no obstacles. It's what you achieve naturally, even under pressure or with hard challenges. Achieving fluency in these zones requires a real effort of mastery and a variety of organizational changes as well. To avoid nasty disappointments, it's key to consider what's possible in our context. When you're thinking about trade-offs, constraints, boundaries, assumptions, and so forth, remember to consider this from many perspectives. Limits can empower your agility, and that will happen only with careful, thoughtful consideration of the potential benefits, investments, and trade-offs. What status quo assumptions and expectations may need to shift? What payoff would make the bother and annoyance of the learning curve going slow to go fast worthwhile? This is a good time to reflect and jot down a few notes or questions about these. Optimizing trade-offs. Do some hand movements. That always wakes me up. Since I can't dance in my talks anymore, now I'm dancing with my hands. It's important to learn as much about the business and organizational systems as you can. For me, influencing change in a large organization starts with my very first conversation with leaders. Change begins when we start asking questions. I use the Agile Fluency Model graphics and my deeper understanding from all the other materials to organize my inquiry with them. I want to understand more. When I talk with leaders about their goals, I can also use the model to share the types of investments that are typically required to get what they need. Doing this early frames how they perceive the opportunity present and greater agility. They've usually contacted me because they already see some opportunity there. And it helps me to discover implicit limiting assumptions as well as explicit constraints they may be facing. It enables me to set appropriate expectations about options and trade-offs. After that initial conversation, I go about gathering data about the organizational system. We use and provide the Agile Fluency diagnostic for this purpose. Even if I already have a sense of what's needed, the diagnostic provides qualitative and quantitative data to back up opinion. The data reveals patterns in the organizational system. Behavior that we see in one team is about that team. Behavior we see across several or most of the teams isn't about the team or the individuals or even the managers. It's about the system that people have unconsciously created to give them the results they're getting. With the collated data, we bring this information back to organizational leaders and we tie it together. We talk with them about the concerns and aspirations they originally shared with us. We remind them of the investments required and tie that back to the actual state of their system. Then they either accept our recommendations or, better yet, really preferred, we conduct a workshop that pulls recommendations from them. So they are creating their own investment plan. With the stories from qualitative data and the numbers from diagnostic quantitative data backing up the work, we've found this to be very motivating to leaders. One company conducted the diagnostic with 50 teams. They found that 2/3 of their teams didn't have a clear understanding of why they were building what they were building. Product managers weren't participating in demos or sharing the reasons for their decisions. So the teams flailed. The diagnostic team brought this information to the senior VPs in the product organization. And that day, after that meeting, fixing this problem became the organization's #1 priority. In large organizations, people often balk at the investments required for success. They only see the restriction in limits. They don't see the empowering creative boost of working within the right limits, the appropriate limits, the relevant limitations. The diagnostic gives leaders the bounded context and information they need to make the case for investment with their peers. After leaders are on board with the investment plan, now we begin the standard Agile cycle of devising experiments and evaluating the results. Many of us already know how to do this part. For many Agile coaches and organizational leaders we talk to, the challenge is having the opportunity to make improvements in alignment with business leaders' goals. The first half of the improvement cycle guides the opportunities in the second half. In short cycles, we iterate and improve, and every 6 months or so, conduct the diagnostic again. So now it's time for questions. I'm going to close the slides in a moment. If you found this useful, we offer an in-depth facilitators workshop for experienced coaches and leaders. If you'd like to become part of our community of licensed Agile Fluency facilitators, visit agilefluency.org and click the Become a Facilitator link, or visit our booth here at Agile100, or drop a note in the Contact Us form on agilefluency.org. Particularly if you don't get your question answered, we'd love to hear from people who want to learn more. So let's move on to questions.
All right. So I have one from a chat. Which method do you suggest for sizing the work?
Well, it depends. I mean, what I like to look for is whatever sort of, if teams are using time boxes like sprints or iterations, or if they're using more of a Kanban, through continuous throughput method, I like to look for how many pieces of work can we move through the system so that the team can see success. So, for example, if a team is adopting more of a Scrum approach and doing, say, 2-week sprints, I want them to have 5 to 10 stories in that sprint that they know they can probably complete because they have a history of doing that. So that if 1 or 2 of them just become much too big or they discover things they didn't realize to begin with, they still have the success of completing most of those stories. So I look for 5 to 10 stories in a sprint. And if they can do the size of stories that they're using, and it helps if they're about the same size. But each one also has to have business value. So it's a little bit of it depends on the nature of the product and the nature of the market and so on. But I look for those small bites that will provide learning and will provide value so that the teams can keep moving along.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can you share maybe a story from a company which applied the Agile Fluency model and go a little bit? Story gives this colorful things to the
Sure.
answer.
Sure. Um, let's see. I think of a good one. Yes, a good one would be we worked with a company in the financial markets industry. They looked at issues around different kinds of investments and companies to invest in, and gave information about those. And they had 8 software teams and an infrastructure team. And they asked us to come in and do some work with them to help their teams improve. They had adopted Scrum maybe 2 or 3 years before, and they had had a really good coach. I ended up asking them, who was your coach? Because a lot of what that person had taught them had really stuck, and they were doing well. But it was a case of they were pretty close to focusing fluency, but the organization really needed delivering fluency from the teams. And so after a few years of moving along, the model made a lot of sense to them because they knew that their teams were doing a lot of the things they were being asked to do, but it really wasn't quite enough to meet their needs. So we went in and we talked with them about their teams and a group of leaders. We were brought in by the engineering manager, the product manager, and the vice president that was involved, but was their boss. And then there were also some more team level managers, and they came in too. And we had a big discussion with all of them, and we talked about the model. And they decided that there was one team that they really wanted to make sure was a focusing team, that they were working on something that they thought that would suit their needs there. 7 of the teams they needed to be delivering teams, and they weren't sure what they were going to do about the infrastructure team, but they knew that they needed to get better at their DevOps. So we went in, and once we had that guidance in mind, we went in, we interviewed every team on its own. We asked them some questions. We had 3 sort of general questions that we asked them, and then we just listened to what they wanted to tell us. And that was the qualitative part of the diagnostic. We learned. And we also told them about what the diagnostics experience would be like to help them understand that we were going to protect their confidentiality and so that they could to show them that we were trustworthy. And in the end, they did trust us to come in. We asked their permission, and we came in and then did the diagnostic workshop with them, which is kind of a robust retrospective. Basically, it holds a mirror up to the team. And they had some outcomes from that. And then we created reports. We gave reports back to each of the teams. We aggregated all the team reports and gave that to the managers. The managers did not see the individual team reports, but they only saw the aggregate. And then we worked with those managers to come up with an investment plan for their team. We used actually the old XP technique of laying everything out on the table and then saying, okay, how much of this is 3 months worth and how much of this is 6 months worth for the manager's work to do the investing. And one of the top things, they had just gained access to another whole section of their floor. And one of the biggest problems that we saw among all of their teams was the difficulty they had communicating. They were in a couple of product owners sat in a different location than the developers, and there were a few remote folks, and it was just there's just a lot of that going on. And so we suggested to them that they use this new area to create dedicated team spaces, because they were all relatively co-located. And so we wanted to make sure that they had dedicated team spaces. Well, so long story short, the main recommendation was that they create co-located spaces for their teams, because the most of the communication barriers had to do with where everybody was sitting. It was kind of a simple and obvious solution when we got to it, but when everyone was in the middle of it, they couldn't see that that's what was going on, that that's what was one of the biggest things that was getting in their way. So that's an example. There were some other things that they adopted as well, and we kept checking in with them and found out what they were doing, but it really worked well.
Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
No,
And I
you're
have
welcome.
another question for you.
Okay.
Have you ever came across the situation that legal aspect prevents a team from flourish, even if they would be able to optimize?
In legal, I guess it depends on the legal aspect. I have, I often run into other departments in an organization getting in the way, HR or facilities or legal or whatever. Organizations that have a lot of regulatory constraints, that I worked with an organization one time that they had to go through federal approval to put their product on the market. That slowed things down. Um, but I think legal requirements are the same. What happens is it's a limit that inhibits what kind of fluency you can expect from your teams. And so it helps the leaders to understand that you cannot say get optimizing fluency if you don't have legal expertise on those optimizing teams that can help them understand as they go along what they need. So yes, it can cause problems in teams. I don't have the story doesn't come right to mind, but it can cause problems if we don't take it into consideration, if we don't say this is a constraint on the kind of product we have to meet, these other legal requirements, these intellectual property requirements, and so on. And so that has to be built in. That awareness has to be built in. We have to have communication flows into the team about that, so that so that we can know that we're building the right product.
Cool.
Other things that people sometimes think are restrictions really aren't. For years and years, people said they couldn't do Agile because of OpEx and CapEx and accounting issues and things. It was the accounting part of the organization that got in the way. And then the Agile Alliance supported an initiative, and some folks went and talked to the Financial Accounting Standards Emergency Board, and the emergency board said, well, we don't have to change any of our regulations. What you're doing will completely fit within our regulations. You just need to frame them this way and that way. And, you'll fit exactly within the accepted accounting standards. So people were assuming a limit and a restriction that wasn't actually there. So it's always good to check into these things. Yeah.
Good. I was thinking one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been working with many clients on fluency level one?
You
And
know, Oh, go ahead. Is more
go
to
ahead.
that question? Okay.
What
Uh,
can we do to increase initial awareness for sub-zero clients?
yeah. For pre-Agile, yeah.
Yeah, so minus one
Yeah.
level. Sorry.
Yeah, right. Um, well, I I go in with the idea that maybe what they're doing is just fine and they don't know it yet. So, they know their business better than I do as an external. I mean, this is a little bit different for internal coaches or internal consultants or internal leaders. But as an external person coming into an organization, I'm there to learn about it, about the business, about how things are going, because maybe they're just fine. But there's a quote I love, and I had half of it in the talk. That is, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Right? So my question is, you've got a system that is working perfectly. They all are. If you're not happy with your results, it means you need to change something in the system. You want to keep the things that are working well for you. If you can, identify those and hold on to those as much as you can, as long as they don't end up getting in the way of the thing you need to do to change. But then there's lots of books out there about doing those kinds of changes. I I'm kind of famous for saying I'm not in the convincing business, so I don't try to convince people. I share with them what I know, what I've seen, what my previous experiences have been. Things like your system is just fine forgetting what's going on right now. If you don't want what's going on right now, then I can help you make whatever shifts in it will get you what you want. But that's up to you. I'm not here to convince you to do that. That's a decision you need to make as the organizational leader. So and that means I don't have to try to convince anybody of anything. All I need to do is be there to help people learn, to give them my stories and my experience, and then let them make their own decisions. And if they say, no, that doesn't make sense to me, I'm like, okay, great, that's good, because now I know I can't be successful with you, and it's time for me to go find the next place.
It's
So I'm happy with
understandable.
that.
It's simple, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy with that outcome too.
I can
Yeah.
feel that. So, what was the most challenging moment in your like past life you need to deal with in an organization? And can you hear me better now with the headset?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Um, in the challenging moment, the most challenging moment for me, and why I have a lot of compassion for people who are in management roles, is I was in a management role with an organization that um, we were brought into a company to help them make some changes. They invited us in to help them make some changes and work with their people to make those changes. But it was a very stressful, very the company was on the brink of some really big changes, and everybody knew it. And it might mean some folks would lose their jobs. It was just a very, very stressful time for both for the people in that company and for the consulting group that I was part of coming in to help. And one of the people who was managing another part of our consulting project um, had a breakdown and started doing some very inappropriate behavior. And it was on a weekend where our boss was gone, and our upper level boss was off doing something else, and I was the only other manager there. And I ended up um, having to sort of managing her emotions, managing the emotions of all the other people who were impacted by her, because she was doing some very destructive things to people, and eventually walk her out of the building. We had to send her home. I mean, she truly had a breakdown, a nervous breakdown. So burnout. She was just burned out and hadn't known. We had talked with her about managing her stress levels and things. She just wasn't able to do it. And so that it's like that's one of those situations. Oh, and then the other one, another time, I was coming into a new project, and it happened to be we opened and we're starting the new project on the day of 9/11. So once you've been through a couple of those kinds of things, everything else seems a lot easier. It's like there's nothing I can't face because those were hard enough.
Yeah. So let's
Yeah.
finish with something more enlightening. So, what was
Okay.
your most like favorite moment on your professional journey? Like something which you always like return to when you.
Oh. That's a really hard one because I've had so many. Um, but there was something that happened on Twitter the other day, and so I'm going to go back to that. Chet Hendrickson posted a tweet that he had found a souvenir pencil from a conference in 2002, I think, 2003. And that happened to be the conference where I first met Chet. It wasn't my first introduction to Agile, but it's where I first met Chet and some other folks. And it was the first Agile related conference. It was XP Agile Universe was the name of it. It was the first Agile related conference where they were holding up open space in parallel with the rest of what was going on. And I had used open space in my practice for a number of years before I came into the Agile world. And that experience was like really confirmed for me, yes, this is where I'm supposed to be. I like working with software development people. I know I have contributions that I can make here, and they've got like my favorite thing in the world going on at their conferences. Oh, and then they had a dance party. And so it was like, yes, I'm in the right place. This is for sure. So that was very satisfying. Just that realization that I really had found my tribe, right? Yeah.
And now I start to feel sorry we can't have a dance party here.
I know. That's one of the I
Yeah,
was showing people, you can do some it's a little harder to share music.
always possible. But
Yeah.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Nice to listen to you and learn from your stories. And so thank you. Thank you for joining
Uh,
us.
you're welcome. It's my pleasure. And I hope folks come and visit our booth.
Yes, please go to visit the booth and join the Coaches Clinic. You have like last hour and a half of this conference. And we started a full hour, so don't forget to stretch a little bit. And
Yes.
I promise to do something with the sound.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.